Hey, eighth grade. So we're just going to keep reading Howl's Moving Castle, and we have just gotten used to our main character, um, and who's Sophie, and we are going to learn more about the start of her adventure. So, she knew the people who work there. Most of them had been there when her father was a boy. She knew Bessie, the only remaining shop assistant. She knew the customers who brought the hats and who bought the hats and the man who drove the cart which fetched raw straw hats in from the country to be shaped on blocks in the shed. She knew the other suppliers and how you made felt for the winter hats. There was not really much that Fanny could teach her, except perhaps the best way to get customers to buy a hat. You lead up to the right hat, love, Fanny said. Show them the ones that won't quite do first. They know the difference as soon as they put the right one on. In fact, Sophie did not sell hats very much. After a day or so of observing in the workshed, and another day going around the clothier and the silk merchants with Fanny, Fanny set her to trimming hats. Sophie sat in a small alcove at the back of the shop, sewing roses to bonnets and veiling to velours, lining all of them with silk and arranging waxed fruit and ribbons stylishly on the outsides. She was good at it, and she quite liked doing it, but she felt isolated and a little dull. The workshop people were too old to be much fun, and besides, they treated her as someone apart who was going to inherit the business someday. Bessie treated her the same way. Bessie's only talk anyway was about the farmer she was going to marry the week after May Day. Sophie rather envied Fanny, who could bustle off to bargain with the silk merchant whenever she wanted. The most interesting thing was the talk from the customers. Nobody can buy a hat without gossiping. Sophie sat in our little alcove and stitched and heard that the mayor never would eat green vegetables, that the wizard Howl's castle had moved around to the cliffs again. Really, that man. Whisper, whisper, whisper. The voices always dropped low when they talked of Wizard Howl, but Sophie gathered that he had caught a girl down in the valley last month. Bluebeard, said the whispers, and then came voices again to say that Jane Ferrier was a perfect disgrace the way she did her hair. That was one who would never attract even Wizard Howl, let alone a respectable man. Then there would be fleeting, fearful whisper about the Witch of the Waste. Sophie began to feel that Wizard Howl and the Witch of the Waste should get together. They seem to be made for one another. Someone ought to arrange a match, she remarked to the hat she was trimming at that moment. But by the end of the month, the gossip in the shop was suddenly all about Letty. Cesari's, it seemed, was packed with gentlemen from morning to night, each one buying quantities of cake and demanding to be served by Letty. She had 10 proposals of marriage, ranging in quality from the mayor's son to the lad who swept the streets, and she had refused them all, saying she was too young to make up her mind yet. I call that sensible of her, Sophie said to a bonnet as she was pleating silk into. Fanny was pleased with this news. I knew she'd be all right, she said happily. It occurred to Sophie that Fanny was glad that Letty was no longer around. Letty's bad for custom, she told the bonnet, pleating away at the mushroom-colored silk. She would make even you look glamorous, you dowdy old thing. Other ladies look at Letty and despair. Sophie talked to hats more and more as weeks went by. There was no one else much to talk to. Fanny was out bargaining or trying to whip up custom much of the day, and Betsy was busy serving and telling everyone her wedding plans. Sophie got into the habit of putting each hat on its stand as she finished it, where it sat, looking almost like a head without a body, and pausing while she told the hat what the body under it ought to be like. She flattered the hats a bit, because you should flatter customers. You have mysterious allure, she told one that was all veiling with hidden twinkles. To a wide, creamy hat with roses under the brim, she said, You are going to have to marry money. And to a caterpillar green straw with a curly green feather, she said, You are as young as a spring leaf. She told pink bonnets that they had dimpled charm, and smart hats trimmed with velvet that they were witty, and she told the mushroom-pleated bonnet, "You have a heart of gold, and someone in a high position will see it and fall in love with you." This was because she felt sorry for that particular bonnet. It looked so fussy and plain. Jane Ferrier came into the shop the next day and bought it. Her hair did look a little strange, Sophie thought, peeping out of her alcove, as if Jane had wound it around a row of pokers. It seemed a pity she had chosen that bonnet, but everyone seemed to be buying hats and bonnets around then. Maybe it was Fanny's sales talk, or maybe it was spring coming on, but the hat trade was definitely picking up. Fanny began to say, a little guiltily, "I think I shouldn't have been in such a hurry to get Martha and Letty placed out. At this rate, we might have managed." There was so much custom as April drew on towards May Day that Sophie had to put on a demure gray dress and help in the shop too. But such was the demand that she was hard at trimming hats in between customers, and every evening she took them next door to the house where she worked by lamplight far into the night in order to have hats to sell the next day. Caterpillar green hats, like the one the mayor's wife had, were much called for, and so were pink bonnets. Then, the week before May Day, someone came in and asked for one with mushroom pleats like the one Jane Ferrier had been wearing when she ran off with the Count Cataract. That night, as she sewed, Sophie admitted to herself that her life was rather dull. Instead of talking to hats, she tried each one on as she finished it and looked in the mirror. This was a mistake. The staid gray dress did not suit Sophie, particularly when her eyes were red-rimmed with sewing, and since her hair was a reddish straw color, neither did the caterpillar green nor the pink. The one with mushroom pleats simply made her look dreary, like an old maid, said Sophie. Not that she wanted to race off with counts like Jane Ferrier, or even fancied half the town offering her marriage like Letty, but she wanted to do something. She was not sure what, that had a bit more interest in it than simply trimming hats. She thought she would find time next day to go and talk to Letty, but she did not go. Either she could not find the time, or she could not find the energy, or it seemed a great distance to the market square, or she remembered that on her own she was in danger from the wizard Howl. Anyway, every day it seemed more difficult to go and see her sister. It was very odd. Sophie had always thought she was nearly as strong-minded as Letty, and now she was finding that there were some things that she could only do when there was no excuses left. "This is absurd," Sophie said. "Market Square is only 2 streets away. If I run—" and she swore to herself that she would go round to Cesari's when the hat shop was closed for May Day. Meanwhile, a new piece of gossip came into the shop. The king had quarreled with his own brother, Prince Justin, it was said, and the prince had gone into exile. Nobody quite knew the reason for the quarrel, but the prince had actually come through Market Chipning in disguise a couple of months back, and nobody had known. The Count of Cataract had been sent by the king to look for the prince, when he happened to meet Jane Ferrier instead. Sophie listened and felt sad. Interesting things did seem to happen, but always to somebody else. Still, it would be nice to see Letty. May Day came, merrymaking filled the streets from dawn onward. Fanny went out early, but Sophie had a couple of hats to finish first. Sophie sang as she worked. After all, Letty was working too. Cesari's was open till midnight on holidays. "I shall buy one of their cream cakes," Sophie decided. "I haven't had one for ages." She watched people crowding past the window in all kinds of bright clothes, people selling souvenirs, people walking on stilts, and felt really excited. But when at last she put a gray shawl over her gray dress and went out into the streets, Sophie did not feel excited. She felt overwhelmed. There were too many people rushing past, laughing and shouting, far too much noise and jostling. Sophie felt as if the past months of sitting and sewing had turned her into an old woman or a semi-invalid. She gathered her shawl around her and crept along close to the house, trying to avoid being trodden on by people's best shoes or being jabbed by elbows in trailing silk sleeves. When there came a sudden volley of bangs from overhead somewhere, and Sophie thought she was going to faint. She looked up and saw the wizard Howl's castle right down on the hillside above the town, so near it seemed to be sitting on the chimneys. Blue flames were shooting out of all 4 of the castle's turrets, bringing balls of blue fire with them that exploded high into the sky, quite horrendously. Wizard Howl seemed to be offended by Mayday, or maybe he was just trying to join in his own fashion. And this is where we'll start for today, guys. If you're interested, I'll be reading more tomorrow, so please listen in. Bye.